listening to the Tech Alliance podcast, or the TAP for short. And my name is Maryna.
And I'm Andrey.
And today we have a book review episode and are going to discuss the most helpful partner development book, Partnernomics, by Mark Brigman, and mention some more good stuff on the way. But before we start, Andrey, I'd like to take you down the memory lane. Do you remember our spreadsheet where we used to write down all our plans and development ideas? Well, as far as I remember, there was just one or two books. I remember how I was searching for partner development books. I made a huge list of seemed-to-be relevant titles, and most of them were dedicated to sales partnerships. And there were a few books on tech alliances. And unfortunately, they were outdated, like, Partnering with Microsoft, which was published in 2005 or something.
Yeah, right. And especially now, right, in 2023, sounds more like ancient history. I agree with you. I remember it was very hard, right? It was the first thing that when was this, like, for context? This must have been about 5-6 years ago for us, right?
And there were some books on partnering between people, not companies, better than nothing, but still not the exact match. I like a quote from Dane Gage's The Partnership Charter. Well, business schools teach students how to be entrepreneurial, but they teach next to nothing about how to be a partner. And I must say that I agree with Dane. There is a huge gap in teaching how to foster relations. Do you have an idea why?
I think I do. First of all, as the charter says, partners have been something of an invisible group, meaning that they operate beyond the range of the vast majority of researchers and consultants, and nothing could be truer, right? There's so many things that come into this. It's hard to define the success of a great partnership and to measure it. And therefore, it's quite hard to explain how to partner in an effective way. With that said, I think what we've discovered is that Mark Brigman actually managed to close the gap, right? And wrote a simple and clear guide to partnering and introduced partner management courses.
Mm-hmm. Right. And you and Mark are acquainted, right? Could you tell us a couple of words about him?
I mean, we're somewhat acquainted, not very closely, but my impression is that Mark is a very impressive individual. He's an author, a keynote speaker, a CEO of a coaching and consultant company of his own. And he helps business professionals to make partnering a core competency, which to me is just incredible. And I mean, what else is there to add? He's a recognized global expert at forming and leading partnerships. And actually, you know what? In no small way, I must also say, somewhat an inspiration for you and me in starting this podcast.
Exactly. And his vast experience helped him write a book we're going to discuss today, Partnernomics. And do you know why I personally adore the book? It is simple, concise, and coherent, easy to remember and practice.
Exactly. I love it. That's exactly what I love about it as well, right? The precision and the concepts. It consists of two major parts. In the first one, Mark defines strategic partnerships and covers best practices. He also explains some basic reasons for success and failure, and also provides step-by-step guidance on how to find a new partner and land the contract. And in the second part, he describes, to me, the essence of his approach, the strategic partnership model, which is a system of 6 elements that help build a fruitful partnership.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about the first part. As far as I remember, Mark conducted research. He asked CEOs of the biggest companies like Microsoft, ABC, General Motors, and so on, what are the most important features a partnership must have to be effective? And it resulted in a list of 13 features. And the first are like trustworthiness, ability to listen, and commitment. And based on this information, Mark describes typical problems in partnerships. These are lack of trust, lack of alignment, lack of transparency, lack of commitment, and lack of results.
Again, we mentioned this, but I think it bears repeating that this simplicity, seeming simplicity, I suppose, the way Mark manages to convey this in such a simple structure is really what strikes me. So it's both unsurprising and yet very powerful that everything is based on trust. Based on these typical problems and key features, Mark develops the partnership success pyramid. I mean, look, the partnership success pyramid is a recipe for success.
A recipe for success for dummies, because even if you're a junior partnership developer, it will be clear what to do.
Exactly. Easy to remember and understand. I mean, yes, in fact, I think I love the name Partnernomics, but I think Partnerships for Dummies, maybe that could be the book that you and I write. But so in the pyramid, there are 5 elements, right? As we mentioned, trust is the base for partnership relations. Trust is hard to gain and easy to lose. It is the most valuable element of a partnership. The whole pyramid of partnership success falls apart without trust.
The second element is my favorite. It's alignment. It implies goals, objectives, mission, values of both partnering companies must be aligned. If they are not, the difference between companies may bring a partnership to a disaster. Many alliances went sour due to the lack of alignment. The first thing that comes to my mind is IBM acquiring Red Hat. Have you heard of the deal?
Sure, it was such a high-profile case back then.
Yeah. And the deal was closed in 2019. However, the cultures were poles apart, and both companies had competing portfolios. Well, some people say it resulted in a huge employee exodus from Red Hat. Well, I tried to fact check. However, I couldn't find enough proof that the exodus was the consequence of the merge, not something else. Have you partnered with a company of a different corporate culture ever?
I think in many ways that's probably the bulk of my experience. Most of the time, there are either a few minor differences that become quite noticeable as the relationship matures, or even there are some major ones that are obvious from the beginning. And I'm sure that has been your experience as well.
Yeah, I had some experience. I led several mutual projects, and partners were complete opposites. One is a relatively small and family like team, very resilient, and the second one was a monstrous corporation with lots of red tape and cutthroat competition. Well, quite often, when we had a slightest issue, the corporate part was eager to frighten us with escalation. Well, I must say, escalation is just a tool. It's good to escalate critical issues. However, they treated the process as an instrument of scare. Anytime an argument went wrong, and it was hard to calm them down and persuade them that everything is manageable based on our level of expertise. And it took a lot of effort.
And this is the perfect example, right? It's a perfect example why it is important to align. I think, in fact, it's also a perfect example why it's necessary to have a certain amount of trust and build it incrementally. But here, coming back to alignment, the more similar partners are, the stronger the partnership is. I would even say it's not just like we do not have to, so that our listeners understand. It doesn't mean that you need to look for partners that are exactly the same as you are. In fact, there is strength in diversity and strength in being different and bringing different things to the table. But your values, sort of the key things that make you tick, if those are not aligned, it will be very hard to build a relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
But let's go back to the success pyramid.
The third element is transparency, and it is knit with trust. Of course, building reliable channels for communication and providing your partner with clear and full details is vital. It reminds me of my experience partnering Delivery Club and Sber. Anytime we had an emergency while working on a common project, I was utterly afraid to tell our stakeholders that we have a problem. Well, of course, I always pulled myself together and informed everyone. And it helped to take preventive measures and deliver the project on time. So transparency is a very important part of a partnership.
I couldn't agree more, right? On the one hand, by openly admitting that a crisis is looming on the horizon, partnership manager wins some time for the team to prepare and to deal with the issue. It also creates the impression and the reality of a trustworthy and reliable professional, which is always good for a partnership. I would also emphasize once again, don't think of these things as only tools to mitigate negative elements of a partnership, right? Transparency is not just about being transparent about things that are going wrong. It's actually about being transparent about many other things, about being transparent about your processes, about your motivations, about things that are succeeding, sort of showing your partner the value that they bring to you so that they're motivated and engaged to do more of that. So transparency is a very positive tool as well.
A very good idea.
But let's go back to Brigman's partnership success pyramid. We've mentioned the first three elements. Let's recap them. They're trust, alignment, and transparency. The fourth, that very clearly builds on these three, is commitment. That makes relationships stable over time. And of course, the fifth result, which sort of generates the juice, the power that propels the partnership forward, is, of course, results. It's pretty clear. You have to understand what the outcomes of a partnership must be and how to attain these goals. And then the outcome is the result of management, attention, discipline, leadership, and
honestly, luck means a lot. Well, Mark writes that there are a lot of partnerships which degrade to just vendor-customer relations because of a poor approach and lack of leadership. And he proposes a strategic leadership model. And as a matter of fact, it is the second huge part of the book.
Exactly, right? Which is, I think, one of our most critical elements. I also want to emphasize, we said this before if you were listening, but bears mentioning again in this episode too, that there's nothing wrong with vendor-customer relations. I think what we want to emphasize here is that if the initial expectations are that a partnership will be put in place, and then when you end up receiving is just a transactional model, you might get disappointment on both sides. And so you might have been better off by just beginning with a supply chain relationship, for example, right? Just making sure that your expectations are correct. But coming back to the strategic leadership model, it is, again, we've said this several times already, it is simple, right? Which is the great thing about it. And it consists of 6 elements: vision, teams, goals, metrics, processes, and results. And you see how results are the joining section between the model and the pyramid. So let's talk a little bit about each of them.
Right. So the first one, vision. It is very easy. Any partnership must have a goal, mission, and values which have to be aligned. And, well, it is clear. The second is teams. That's my favorite part. As Mark says, companies don't do business with companies, but people do business with people. And it's crucial who is a partner manager. It should be a strong leader, and Mark suggests a list of traits like trusting, inspirational, emotional intelligent, self-accountable, empathetic, competent. It's a really long list of traits.
It is a long list. It's a little bit intimidating, but okay.
And Mark describes each trait and even gives advice on how to choose a perfect candidate for a partner development manager position. Very useful.
Look, what I would also add is that it's okay that the list is long. And I don't think the expectation is that anybody starting in this career path or like joining this career path from a different one needs to necessarily tick all the boxes immediately and tick them at the highest possible degree. This is more of a path of self-improvement and a clear guide kind of strength that you need to build and develop in yourself. And also maybe an interesting checklist to see that if some of these values, some of these traits don't feel natural to you, like feel really like not your cup of tea, then maybe this is not the right field for you also. So that's a good checklist to kind of be able to make that kind of decision. So the third element of the model are goals. And it's quite obvious. And yet I would add that you shouldn't skip on that. You should, when forming the partnership, manage mutual expectations. Are you aiming to penetrate a new market, transform each other's businesses, find a cure for cancer, like how high are you aiming together, right? And how are you going to measure it? And the fourth, of course, is how you're going to measure it is metrics. So we're not going to get into, unless you want us to, we're not going to get into the discussion of what the SMART model of goal setting is, but metrics are necessary, or you need to understand. Like it's insufficient to say, oh yeah, we will find a cure for cancer. You need to say which cancer, how many patients, and so on and so forth. You need to really be clear. Otherwise, you'll never be able to say if you're successful or not. And without that, you won't be able to feel like you're achieving anything. And that will be detrimental. Mark suggests actually using a scorecard with specific indicators and explains how to use that. So observing those metrics, I can't emphasize that.
Right,
It's vital.
right. And as far as I remember, it was the most challenging part in our work to define metrics, because we were working with innovations and there were a great degree of unexpected outcomes there.
Indeed, exactly. But I think, how passionate I am about innovation. I think even there, not even there, I take it back, not even, but specifically in that field, it's even more important to understand what are you going to measure yourself. You might be surprised and you might sort of not achieve what you initially set out to measure, but that should not discourage you. It should be a continuous process of receiving new inputs and new types.
Let's get back to the book. The fifth element of leadership success pyramid is processes. And the author gives a list of critical steps which need to be taken care of even before you sign the contract, such as strategic partner plan development, communication plan, escalation, dispute resolution, and more. I liked these parts so much because it was my cheat sheet.
Yeah, it is so helpful. I know, right? Because it really, in quite a simple way, allows you to, especially if you're managing several partnerships at the same time, allows you to just have a quick check-in on how things are going and where you are. The last element of the pyramid, which you mentioned before, are results. Again, it is obvious that it needs to be there. I would like to maybe emphasize here that results do not necessarily have to be what you set them out to be initially, right? That you need to be flexible and accept that what you achieve might be different from what you expected. That's okay, as long as you acknowledge that and learn from that, and you feel like you've, one way or another, obtained some value, whether that value is direct in terms of revenue or whether that value is in terms of the knowledge base that you now have expanded. But that is going to be the fuel that propels forward your company, but not just your organization, both organizations involved in the partnership. At the end of the book, Mark once again stresses the importance of having the right person on the job. The success of the partnership is founded on well-built processes plus strong leaders.
So, a note to our listeners, read the book, listen to the podcast, and share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, please, jump in the comments. I think we'd really love to hear if you've read the book, what do you think about it? And if you haven't, what do you think? Like, does our discussion make you want to read it, and why? Also, Maryna, I don't think I can let you off so easily. I remember you promised to tell us about an article by a mathematician with surprising but helpful management insights.
Right. I keep my word. The article is called You and Your Research by Richard Hammond. As a matter of fact, it is a transcription of the Bell Communications Research Colloquium Seminar, which took place in 1986.
Jesus, research colloquium.
It's fun. The speech is dense. It has a lot of food for thought. And there is a part I like so much. Hammond noticed that if a scientist has the door to the office closed, he or she gets more work done today and tomorrow and is more productive than most. But 10 years later, somehow, the person doesn't quite know what problems are worth working on. Who works with the door open gets all kinds of interruptions, but also occasionally gets clues as to what the world is and what might be important.
I mean, Hemming probably would have benefited from visiting some of the modern IT offices. We already work in open space and get too many interruptions most of the time.
I know, but the core of the idea is that by communicating with your colleagues from different departments and positions, you gather priceless information about your own company you didn't know. And the bigger your department is, the harder it is to get out of your zone of competence and meet a new perspective. Well, let's take Google, for example. How often do you communicate outside of your department and your zone of competence?
I see exactly what you mean. And sort of maybe you and me were in a bit of an unusual position, unusual roles in our companies. That's like 90% of my job, to communicate outside of my department. In fact, I communicate more with people in other teams, but that's sort of because this is where I get both my insights and inspiration and vision of what's coming next. That's the only way. I see absolutely no way to do my job without talking to people from other teams. And maybe, okay, we need to acknowledge that maybe if you are in engineering and software engineering, those kind of roles in accounting, whatever, you don't need to be so exposed to the rest of the company. However, I feel like the healthy balance would be beneficial. And everybody needs to find their own balance, but some kind of exposure to the rest of the company is definitely hugely beneficial.
Right, I do agree.
I mean, did you apply this to your career somehow as well?
I used to work in a huge company which was juggling different types of businesses like social networks, online shopping, food delivery, games, and much more. And by keeping my door open to all colleagues and dining with acquaintances from other departments, I was able to feel the pulse of the company and see problems from different angles and try to find a solution through partnering with Google, for example. And there is one more funny story from the speech. Hamming used to eat with math scientists. However, he knew a lot on the field and he didn't learn much. And then he started dining with chemists and talking to them. After a couple of weeks, he started asking, "What are the important problems of your field?" And after a week or so, he started asking chemists, "What important problems are you working on?" And after some more time, Hamming came in one day and said, "If what you are doing is not important, and if you don't think it is going to lead to something important, why are you at Bell Labs working on it?" He wasn't welcomed after that, and he had to find somebody else to eat with. And that's funny. That was in spring. And in the fall, one of the chemists stopped Hamming in the hall and said, "Hey, Hamming, that remark of yours got underneath my skin. I thought about it all summer. That were the important problems in my field. I haven't changed my research. But I think it was, well, worthwhile." Well, Hammond said, "Thank you," and went on. And then Hammond noticed a couple of months later that this chemist was made the head of department. And the other day he was member of the National Academy of Engineering. He succeeded. And Hamming mentions that he has never heard the names of any of the other fellows at that table mentioned in science and scientific circles. Maybe because they were unable to ask themselves, what are the important problems in my field? What do you think of that?
I mean, wow, what a story. First of all, it's got 2 pieces of advice for the price of 1, which is A, eat with other people, and B, ask yourself the important questions. You really set a high bar, but it definitely puts Richard Hamming's speech on my must-read list. The question, what are the important problems in my field, really connects with me. Like, what are the important problems and challenges in partner development?
I have an idea. Let's ask all our guests in the next episodes and find out.
What a great idea. This is perfect. Let's use that as a blitz question for everybody. All right. We've been talking for a while. Looks like it's high time to wrap up. Huge thanks to our listeners. As always, it was the first episode of the Tech Alliance podcast with Andrey
and Maryna.
Please subscribe, find us wherever you get your podcasts from. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay tuned. Links below.
Catch you next time on the tab.